People often leave religion because they find it stifling, controlling, and maybe they don't agree with it. And there's a lot of different reasons to leave a religion. However, when you do, you may find out that it is a bigger problem than you originally had in mind. What up, everybody? It's Chris Roscoe with Operation Moksha, and today I'm going to be talking about how to overcome religious programming. And this is actually a much more complicated concept than I originally thought it was going to be. When I first saw this question in the comments, I was like, pretty fucking simple. Just figure out who you want to be and what you want to do and integrate anything that gets in the way. Like, how would that be different than anything else? But then I came and sat down to actually write this script, and I realized that it was far more complicated than my initial reaction was originally giving it credit for. So I actually want to break down a lot of what goes into the substructures of what a religion actually is and what it actually gives you, and what needs to be replaced if you're going to walk away from something like that and maintain the same level of solidity and comfort and structure and feeling like you have purpose in the world. Because religion gives you so much more than just like a belief in Sky Daddy. You know, it's just so much bigger than that. And so we're going to touch on a lot of the cultural implications. We're going to touch on the personal and existential implications. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about Nietzsche's theories on this and how I think my viewpoint mixed with his viewpoint can give you something really solid to aim for. I have this like stomach thing. So I didn't want to go to the studio, but I was going to go anyway. And then I got in the car and something was wrong with my car. So now I got back here to record and there's something wrong with my light. But I wanted to get you guys content, so here the is. Hopefully it's not that bad. What it takes to actually overcome religious programming. Because like I said, this is a much more complicated issue than I originally thought. You know, I saw this question in one of my YouTube videos. I was like, that's an interesting question. Like why would somebody need to ask that question? It was the first thing that went in my head. It's just like, because the answer to pretty much all of things is to just figure out who you want to be, what kind of life you want to live, the kind of person that lives that life effortlessly, and then integrate anything that gets in your way of that. And that is basically the solution for leaving anything. Relationships, cultures, countries, religions, whatever in order to find your way out of anything, the answer is always, what is most alive in me? Who do I actually want to be? What do I actually want to do? What kind of life do I actually want to live? What is genuinely, truly exciting to me? Can I build a life around that? And then can I integrate anything that gets in the way? That's like the broad general answer that will solve most problems, because that first initial rundown of the situation is accurate. The solution is to figure out who you want to be, what kind of life you want to live, all that sort of shit. Live that, and then integrate whatever gets in your way. Like, that is still the solution. But when it comes to religion, there's a lot more to take into consideration. And I don't think anything exemplifies this quite as well as a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all of that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe the blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? And he's basically talking about the death of God. And what he means by the death of God is this idea that we all used to collectively believe in God. There was a point in history, up until pretty recent history, where whatever culture you lived in, but he's specifically referring to Western culture, where in Western culture, you knew who you were. You knew what your reason for existing was. You knew who created you. You knew how to put your struggles into a meaningful context. Like, there's so many wonderful things that came from everybody believing in God and everybody believing in the same God and everybody having the same standards and values and metrics and all kinds of shit. Like, there's just so much value that comes along with that flies under the radar that people don't necessarily know how to take into consideration. So once everybody stopped believing in God, like, science showed up and people were like, wait a minute, this book doesn't make any sense. You can't take this literally. And so people started to lose their faith in God, which I'm not here to tell you should believe in God or not. What I am here to tell you is that there's more than just whether or not you believe in the Sky Daddy. Like, there's just so much more to that, right? Because when I talk to people about religion and leaving religion and whether or not they like religion and blah, 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 the critics of it always treat it as if it's just a purely logical thing. You know, it's just like, oh, that doesn't make logical sense. You can't prove that, therefore it's false. And they take this extra unnecessary step that says it's false and also has no merit, which I think is ridiculous. On one level, I don't think religion was ever supposed to be like, this is the actual facts, like fucking believe this actually happened. Like, maybe some people want you to believe that, I don't know. The Bible that we kind of know now was largely put together for political purposes in order to keep you held to the thing. And this quote, I think, really gives a lot of weight to the situation. Because when I talk to people about religion, I talk to people who don't like religion, critics and all that sort of shit, they treat it as if it's this kind of flippant thing that doesn't really matter. You know, they're like, oh, that's not scientifically accurate. Like, you shouldn't believe that as literal, therefore the entire thing has no merit. Therefore, all religion has no merit. This is what a lot of atheists that I see and talk to have to say. This is what a lot of religious critics have to say. It's just so unbelievably ignorant, foolish, and naive. Because, like, yes, on one level, you shouldn't take any of these religions as literal things that actually happened. Because if you do, they all contradict themselves and they don't make sense. However, if you look at them as metaphors, and if you look at what they have given to society, it's so much more valuable and so much more important to the psyche and to the collective and to the culture and to the environment. And I think this quote from Nietzsche really hammers that home, right? Because up until the point where we stopped believing in God, we had a uniform system of values. We had a uniform answer to some of life's hardest questions. We had shieldings from so many things that as soon as you walk away from religion, there's all these existential questions that you don't have answers for. And those questions are really difficult to sit with because it's the ultimate unknown, right? Like on an evolutionary level, human beings don't like the unknown. It's not good for us. Going into the unknown means you could die. But we also have an inherent desire to go into the unknown, which makes being a human being fascinating. However, the unknown is scary to us. And an existential unknown is goddamn terrifying. An existential unknown is like when you don't even know what you are or why you're here. All of these questions that we spend so much time asking, religion gave you comfortable, pleasant answers to shield you from all that. Even if you don't like some of the answers, it at least doesn't leave this gaping hole of, I don't know what the fuck I am, and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here. It leaves all of that, you at least have an answer. So all those parts of you that would have an existential meltdown and freak out have some kind of band-aid over them. And that you cannot underestimate the value of that. Like I talk about this a lot when I teach about identity, where if you know anybody who's ever had an identity crisis, you know how terrible that is to not know who you are, or what to do with your life, or how to engage in anything, because you're like either in between identities or you had an experience that is so out of alignment with your identity that it starts to fall apart and you don't know what the fuck is going on anymore. That is not a place we're supposed to live in. And when you break away from something like religion and you don't have answers to all those questions, you are forced to live in that. And so there's a few different things that I see people do as a result of this. Now, one of the easiest, simplest, and laziest ways to fuck this up is to go the Aleister Crowley route, where if you don't know who Aleister Crowley was, he was this big time occultist, magician, in general, just shitty dude. Even though he somehow managed to get on the fucking Beatles cover, but we're not going to go into that today. He was this magic dude who was a shitty guy who basically kind of brought occultism into popular culture in the West. He also called himself like the most evil man alive, and like he called himself like the Beast 666, like total fucking edgelord. And the reason for this is because he was raised in a very strict, dogmatic, fundamentalist Christian religion, or a sect of Christianity. And so when his dad died, which is basically the pillar of this whole thing, basically he just flips from one extreme to the other. And that's what I see a lot of people do, right? They'll go from being like a hardcore Christian, like I love Jesus and everything, to being like in death metal goth, right? And they'll be like, I gotta go to the far extremes, bro. And like, that's fine. That's an okay thing to do. You need to explore the extremes in order to be able to find your way in the middle, but I wouldn't fucking recommend staying there. Especially because like Aleister Crowley is the ultimate version of this, and he died miserable and alone and everybody hated him, and it was not a great life for this guy. He did a lot of terrible things. All he wanted to do was push further and further away from his upbringing, and as a result he pushed further and further into some really disgusting shit, and I don't recommend that path. So don't be a reactionary. Don't just swing from one extreme to the other. That's not a healthy thing to do, because especially when you got to understand that when you're doing that, all you're really doing is taking the parts of you that wanted to fit in with the previous structure, and you're pushing them so far away that all you have access to is the opposite. So you're going to be in conflict with that shit for the rest of your life. You're never going to have a real true sense of alignment or congruence. You're just going to be in conflict with yourself. You're going to go down some shitty paths, And any value that any part of you that resonated with the religion might be able to provide for you, you won't have access to because you're too busy keeping that down, because that's the bad thing that you have to break away from. So don't fucking do that. It's not good. One of the other things that I see people do is they'll leave a religion like Christianity or whatever it might be, and then they just trade it for a softer religion like New Age or spirituality or witchcraft or some shit like that. However, when you look at actual mindset, they still have the dogmatic religious outlook that they would. It's just they're applying it to different values and different principles, and you can tell they actually haven't evolved psychologically or existentially beyond the kind of mentality that they were trying to get away from. They just traded templates. They were like, these are the people that used to tell me who I am and what I'm supposed to do and what I'm all about, and now these are the new people that tell me who I am and what I'm about and what I'm supposed to do and all that sort of shit. You're just trading masters, which is fine, because maybe the new one is a little bit more palatable, maybe the new one has a little bit more freedom, maybe the new one has whatever. However, again, it's not a place I recommend staying, because whatever it was you didn't like about the religion, the fact that you can't think for yourself and you don't feel free and you feel confined and constrained by all these dogmatic fundamental beliefs and all that sort of shit, you just got new ones. That's all you did. So I still wouldn't recommend staying there. That is still a refusal to sit in the unknown. That is still a refusal to sit in the unknown long enough to have the answers come forth from your spirit. Because this is, and I'll get into that a little later, but that's what I did in order to create a solid existential foundation. And then the next thing that I see people do, which is the last one I'm going to talk about, is this kind of loopy-do that people do. I see this a lot right now, actually. This seems to be very popular for some reason. People will leave a religion, and then they'll go into New Age or some other kind of religion, and then I'm projecting here, right? Because I don't know why everybody does this. Some people maybe do have genuine divine revelations, and maybe some people do have some really cool life-changing experiences that lead them down a certain path, and maybe Jesus is real, maybe Allah's talk. I don't know. I can't fucking say. But what it looks like to me is that you leave the comfort and familiarity and structure and whatever of a religion, and then the new thing where you go and try to find your freedom, it's not as good, because you actually have to self-source a lot of those things. So the existential anxiety is high. The lack of feeling like someone out there is taking care of you is hard to deal with. Maybe sitting in the unknown, or maybe you don't have a uniform enough community to make you feel safe, or whatever the thing might be is. So people just go right back to religion, right? They'll be like, I'm in this thing, now I'm gone because that thing was bad. And well, this sucks too, so I guess I might as well go back there. And again, that's not what everybody's doing. If you're the type of person who's gone back to Jesus or whatever, I'm not judging you, I don't care. This is for the people that genuinely want to form a new way of living and form a new way of relating to themselves that goes beyond religion. Now, you might even be questioning why that's a good thing, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So if you are this type of person, you have to understand that, if this resonates, you have to understand that you're not going back to the religion because it's right. Because you genuinely agree with everything. You're going back because you couldn't find anything better. Going back to an ex-girlfriend or whatever, where it's just I can do better. And then you go and then you realize that you can't do better. So you try and get your ex back. It's that type of shit. Because I remember when I left my religion at about 19, I started to really want to go back to being a Jehovah's Witness, And it had nothing to do with whether or not they were right. It had nothing to do with that. It was just those girls are really pretty and they're all really sweet and they've got pretty good values and there's a whole community that's going to hold them to those values. So I'd be safer there. And those girls are really pretty. And I like the fact that there's a community, and I like the fact that there's a bunch of people that can take care of me and watch out for me and blah, 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 blah. And it was all just about me. It was about my comfort and security. And once I realized that I was gonna have to accept all that shit as true, I was like, okay, that's not an option. I gotta find a new thing. All that to say, basically, those are the three main traps I see people fall into. And they're fine. Whatever you want to do, I don't give a shit. Except for the first one. Don't do the first one. The reason all this is important is because when he says, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? That's a big, impactful quote. That says a lot. In order to rise to the level of what religion gave us, without having to believe these literal things that don't make sense, we have to rise above and become gods. And that's an interesting statement, right? Because it's I don't think he's talking about like actually becoming some kind of deity. I don't think he was that fucking ridiculous. I think instead what he's talking about is the ability to sit with the unknown, to walk away from religion and all of its safe and comfortable and convenient answers and the things that it shields us from and all that sort of stuff, to be able to walk away from that without having to immediately replace it, right? To walk away from that and sit in the unknown long enough for God, you could call it, yourself, your spirit, your soul, whatever you want to call it. There's this thing in you that will answer you. If you sit with the question, who am I? Like, why am I here? What the fuck is my life all about? What am I supposed to do? If you actually ask those questions and listen for the answers, they will eventually arise from somewhere. You could call that God, you call it anything. I don't give a shit what you call it. But that thing that answers you is trustworthy. That's the thing that led me to coaching. That's the thing that led me to everything I've ever done and that has ever been good for me, is because I sat with the unknown long enough to ask these questions. And there's another series of things that have to happen as well, because religion doesn't just shield you from really difficult questions and existential anxiety and all that sort of shit. It gives you a framework for relating to yourself and your struggles. I'll talk about the struggles first because those are easier to deal with, right? Like, I grew up with a Christian frame, so that's the one I know the easiest. But when you go through a struggle, right, it's like God testing you. It's God being like, are you one of my good boys and good girls or whatever? Which is such a dumb thing to do. But anyways, it's God testing you, right? And like, you have a context. You're like, okay, I'm being tested, and all I have to do is show that I'm good enough that I can pass this fucking test, and I'll be one of God's good ones, and I'll get into the good thing, and I'll get whatever. And then when you leave that, there's no context to put that shit into, right? There's no like insane fucking battle between good and evil that you're stuck in between, and you gotta find your fucking way through it. Like, that's not there. You're just a person suffering. And so you have to create your own structure. You have to create your own context in which to suffer. Like, for me, I know that every single time I suffer, every single time a part of me is suffering, I know that if I love that part, it's going to get healthier and I'm going to be better than ever. I know that when something bad happens to me and I feel pain, I know I can harness that pain into wisdom. I can turn it into power. I can turn it into insight. I can use it as something I can use to move forward. And I take that for granted now. So I don't really need this like huge battle between good and evil in order to make context out of my struggles. I can make my context immediately meaningful and immediately lead to something good by doing the integrative practice and knowing that if I face and integrate anything that might ever cause me to suffer, I will only get better. And you might as well call that having God on your side, because it functions the fucking same. Beyond being able to put your struggles into a meaningful context, another thing that cannot be overlooked is the fact that religious contexts allow you to feel unconditionally loved even though you don't deserve it. And they also allow you to feel like there is some incredible ultimate father archetype looking out for you, organizing things in your favor, making sure that you're okay, that you're safe, protected, looked out for, and all that sort of shit. And the thing is, most of us aren't taught to love ourselves unconditionally. And most of us aren't taught to be that kind of caretaking, I'm looking out for you, I'm keeping track of everything, I'm making sure you're okay kind of person for ourselves. Right, like, we may have been, if you had like a good father or mother or something like that, you may have been taught to do that for your community, but very few people have been taught to do that for themselves. I know very few people that have ever been taught to do that for themselves. Most of the people I know have had to learn. But this is an intricate and essential part of religion. Because again, I grew up with Christianity, but it's like when you have God and Jesus in your life, no matter how shitty you feel, no matter what's going on, no matter what's happening, you know that you are loved unconditionally. And that love doesn't have to come from you. You don't have to love yourself. Like, that work is put off on some other entity. It doesn't necessarily always lead to a feeling of being loved, but at the very least, psychologically, you know you're unconditionally loved. And so that gives a lot of power. That gives a lot of beauty. It's just a hell of a thing to walk away from. And especially, or also when you take a look at the fact that like there's this father archetype as well, because in most religions, God is like a dude. And there's reasons for this that I'm not going to go into. With God as a dude, he's like the ultimate father. He's like looking out for you. He's taking care of you. He's making sure that you get to walk your path and do all kinds of cool things. And when we disconnect from religion, unconditional love that we used to get from an outside source, we no longer have access to. And that like sense of feeling like someone is out there looking out for us, we lose access to that. And these are the archetypal mother and father archetypes that you have in your psyche. There is a part of your mind that is capable of loving you unconditionally. I've heard about these experiences that people have about like, visions where they meet Jesus or being in contact with a guru or some other kind of transcendental experience, they'll talk about this feeling of being unconditionally loved and having it actually be fucking painful because you're being unconditionally loved even though you feel like you don't deserve it. However, that is an experience you can self-source. That is an experience I've been teaching people to self-source for the last 10 years of my life. That is an experience that I have used consciously that I can pull up and conjure up at any fucking moment to love any part of myself that needs it in order to facilitate that kind of nurturing and loving and the kind of experience that you would get from the ultimate kind of like divine mother. You have access to that within you and you can self-source it at any time. Same with the father archetype. You have an internal father archetype. You have a part of you that is capable of looking out for you, making sure that your life is taken care of, making sure that all the little details are managed and blah, 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 so that you don't have to worry about it. That you have access to that as well. However, when you leave religion and you don't know how to access those archetypes within your own psyche, the dependence that you didn't know you had suddenly starts to become glaringly obvious. You're no longer unconditionally loved. You're no longer unconditionally looked out for. You're no longer a part of the winning team that can overcome all obstacles and fucking do whatever to evil. Like, it's a huge context shift. And so you have to build connection to your internal mother archetype. You have to build connection to your internal father archetype. You need to ask yourself the difficult questions like, who am I? What am I doing here? Like all those sorts of things, those have answers, and you actually have to sit with those questions long enough to be able to answer them. And that can be a very difficult thing because it takes a long fucking time for those answers to show up. Sometimes, depending on how averse you are to hearing them or how connected or committed or attached you are to the old way of being or whatever, there's different factors that can make those questions harder to answer depending on where you're at in your life. But I can tell you that there are answers. And ultimately, I think this is what Nietzsche was leading us to. Is his idea of the Übermensch is somebody who's able to ask these questions and create their own value system that can take the place of a religious value system. And I've personally found something interesting is that as I've asked myself these questions of what do I think is right and wrong, what are my values? Who am I as an individual? When I really figure out my values, who I am as a person, like a lot of them end up being fairly universal. And they end up agreeing with most of religions. It's just like, be kind to people. Don't be a shitty person. Don't steal stuff, because that way you won't have a clear conscience. I want a clear conscience. Be a good person generally. Like, live for something bigger than yourself. Don't be selfish. Give as much as you can. Like, these are just the things that actually feel good when you really think about it. You don't need a God to tell you this stuff. You don't need a religion to tell you this stuff. If you actually just sit with the unknown long enough and ask yourself, what kind of person do I really want to be? What person feels the best to be? What is the best existential experience I can have? You're going to find that being kind and honest and loving and generous and being of service and devoting yourself to something bigger than yourself are all the ways to make your existential experience as best as it can possibly be. And that's fucking universal to all of us. And that's what religion has been telling us. When you get it from an outside source, you don't have the ability to self-source that internal knowing. It's a belief that someone else told you with that you may or may not wrestle with for the rest of your life. But when you break away and allow yourself to actually ask those questions and allow the answers to come forth from somewhere inside of you, they're so much more real. And they're in service of what you want, not of being like a good boy or a good girl or like the ideal Christian or super good Muslim or whatever it might be. You get to self-source these things because of an internal knowing. And if you're a Christian, there are actually some books of the Bible that were specifically cut out. There's like at least 80 books of the Bible that they didn't keep in. And one of them is specifically talking about how Jesus taught this version of Christianity, how the kingdom of God is inside you and all that sort of shit. And then these fucking popes, I forget his name, he decided, let's get rid of all the ones that don't allow us to fucking control people. And so a lot of these books called the Apocrypha got lost, but there is a lot of really good information talking about that, like, yeah, this is an element of what Christianity was from the very beginning. So like, yes, look for this shit inside yourself. The answers are fucking there. And if you are the type of person that genuinely wants to break away, find your own value system and connect to that which is like universal in all of us, you have to be able to sit with the discomfort. You have to be able to sit with the unknown for as long as it takes. You have to be able to learn to love yourself unconditionally, look out for yourself, take care of yourself, create a community around your values. It takes a lot of work. However, once you realize that all the stuff we used to get outside can be sourced internally, it's like, what the fuck else would we do? What else would you do? I can't think of anything else you would do. So it's worth it. It's worth it to take the time. It's worth it to ask these questions. It's worth it to sit in the unknown. And if you sit in the unknown, it might just lead you back to religion, which is fine. But as long as those answers and that guidance and that direction comes from inside of you, that is something that you can trust. Whereas if it's something that's coming from outside of you, if you're the type of person who thinks for yourself, or at least wants to and has a little bit of critical thought, being told what to do, when it doesn't match up with your internal experience, is going to be a challenging thing. So at the very least, you got to get clear with yourself just so you can have a clear conscience and not argue with whatever God you've chosen. So I hope this is helpful. I know this is complex and I went into a lot of shit. So if you have any questions, let me know. But this is the type of answer I thought this question deserved. And so it's been my pleasure to talk about it. Let me know what else you want me to cover, and I will do that. I love you. I'll see you next time.